Dust blows across a forgotten plain where no cities ever stood. Bones lie buried beneath layers of time, some human, some not quite. A child picks up a stone tool, unaware it's older than any pyramid, older than any name. And somewhere in your DNA, a whisper remains, not just of survival, but of a shared origin. Because the truth is startling. We weren't the first humans, just the last. Thousands of years before you, the Earth was home to other kinds of humans. Different shapes, different minds. Some walked upright in Africa's sun. Others hunted mammoths in the cold silence of Siberia. Some died out quickly. Others thrived for hundreds of thousands of years, until suddenly they were gone. And one species, only one, survived. You, me, United States. But who were they? The ones that didn't make it. What set us apart? Was it intelligence, cooperation, or something far more mysterious? This is the story of the 8 forgotten human species who walked the earth before Homo sapiens, and the final chapter of a family saga written in fire, bone, and silence. Chapter 1. The family we never knew. Long before cities, before history, before the word human even meant anything, Earth was home to a wild experiment. Not just one kind of human, but many. We call ourselves Homo sapiens, the wise man. But we are only the latest in a long line of species that once belonged to the genus Homo, an entire family of humans stretching back over 2 million years. Some were giants, some were barely over a meter tall. Some lived in forests, others in deserts. Some had brains as big as ours. Some made tools, others painted. A few even mated with us. But one by one they disappeared. Archaeologists have uncovered clues scattered across time. Fossilized skulls, stone tools, traces of fire, bone flutes, DNA. Each piece paints part of a picture, a story of survival, migration, extinction, and, finally, us. Let's meet the lost siblings of our species, the 8 humans who came before, and why they're no longer here. Chapter 2. Homo habilis, the first to shape the world. They didn't walk like us, they didn't talk like us, but they were the first to change the world with their hands. Over 2 million years ago, in the shifting grasslands of East Africa, a new kind of creature emerged. They were still ape-like in many ways. Long arms, sloping faces, a smaller brain, but something had changed. They began to break stones. Not just any stones. These early humans, who scientists would later call Homo habilis, created the first known tools, simple flakes chipped from larger rocks, sharp enough to scrape meat from bone, crack open marrow, or slice through plant fibers. It was the dawn of technology, and the spark that separated them from the beasts. The name Homo habilis means handy man. They lived nearly 2.4 to 1.5 million years ago. And though they didn't build fire or speak in language as we know it, they started a revolution, one stone at a time. They weren't hunters, not yet, but they were scavengers, survivors. When predators like saber-toothed cats left behind kills, Homo habilis arrived later, tools in hand, carving what meat they could from the remains. It was brutal, primitive, but it worked, and their brains growing slowly. From roughly 500 cc to nearly 700 cc, a leap that would shape the entire future of the human line. Their life was not peaceful. Death came young. Injury and hunger were constant companions. But they learned. They taught. They passed knowledge through demonstration, imitation, memory. And with each broken stone, they carved a path into the future for all the humans yet to come. Without Homo habilis, there would be no fire, no language, no Homo sapiens. They were the first hands to shape a human world, but they too would vanish. Not in violence, not in flame, but in quiet succession, out-evolved by newer forms of humans who would take their tools, their instincts, and build something bigger. They were the beginning, and every chipped rock in the African dirt still remembers them. Chapter 3. Homo erectus, the firewalkers. If Homo habilis started the journey, it was Homo erectus who learned to walk, not just upright, but out of Africa, into the unknown. Appearing around 2 million years ago, Homo erectus was different from those before. Taller, stronger, smarter. They had long legs built for distance, a body designed not just to survive, but to roam. And roam they did. They were the first true global explorers in the human story. From Africa, they pushed into the Middle East, then Asia, even parts of Indonesia and China. Fossils of Homo erectus have been found thousands of miles apart, from the hot savannas of Kenya to the cool grasslands of Dmanisi, Georgia, a trail of bones and tools that stretched across continents. But movement wasn't the only thing they mastered. They tamed fire. We can't say exactly when. Fire doesn't fossilize, but charred bones, blackened hearths, and ash layers at sites like Zhoukoudian in China tell the tale. Homo erectus didn't just find fire, they learned to keep it alive. Fire changed everything. It brought warmth in cold nights, protection from predators, cooked food, which softened meat and unlocked calories. And, maybe most importantly, it brought people together. Around its glow, new kinds of communication could grow. Not full language, but gestures, sounds, intentions shared through flame-lit eyes. Their tools evolved too. They created Acheulean hand axes, beautifully symmetrical, shaped with skill and purpose. These weren't just tools, they were thinking made visible. And so was their brain, nearly 1,000 cubic centimeters, close to modern humans. Not just instinct, strategy, memory, foresight. Homo erectus didn't live in caves forever. They moved, adapted, they hunted large animals, they planned. They survived through ice and drought in unfamiliar lands for over 1.5 million years, longer than any other human species, longer than us. So far, and then, slowly, they too faded, not from failure, but from transformation. Some of them evolved into later species. In Asia, perhaps giving rise to the Denisovans. In Africa, possibly becoming Homo heidelbergensis, the ancestor of both Neanderthals and us. Homo erectus did not disappear. They became the bridge between what was and what would be. Chapter 4. Homo floresiensis, the hobbits of human history. In 2003, deep inside a limestone cave on the Indonesian island of Flores, scientists uncovered something they couldn't explain. A tiny skeleton, just over 3 feet tall, with a skull the size of a grapefruit, yet shaped like a human's. At first, they thought it must be a child, but it wasn't. It was an adult. A new species entirely. They named her Homo floresiensis, but the world would come to know her as the Hobbit. She lived not in legend but in reality, a miniature human species that survived on this remote island until as recently as 50,000 years ago, long after Homo erectus had spread across the world, and long after our own ancestors had emerged. How did she get there? Most believe her ancestors were Homo erectus, stranded by rising seas or swept across islands on floating vegetation. Over generations, trapped on Flores with limited food and no predators, they evolved into a smaller size, a process known as island dwarfism, but their brains, though small, weren't primitive. They made tools. They hunted pygmy elephants, real ones known as stegodon. They used fire. And they survived for hundreds of thousands of years on a sliver of land, isolated from the rest of humanity's story. They weren't tall, they weren't powerful, but they endured. Until something changed. The arrival of modern humans on nearby islands might have sealed their fate. Disease, competition, or direct conflict, we don't know. But by the time Homo sapiens spread across Southeast Asia, the hobbits were gone. They left no writing. No monuments, just bones in a cave, and a riddle still unsolved. Were they a fluke of nature, a side branch of evolution, or proof that intelligence doesn't require size, but adaptation? Homo floresiensis reminds us that human form is not fixed, that our lineage is full of surprises, and that even on the edges of the world, in silence and shadow, the human story was unfolding. Chapter 5. Homo heidelbergensis, the forgotten ancestor. Before there were Neanderthals, before there were us, there was Homo heidelbergensis, the great human progenitor lost between timelines. Chapter 5. Homo heidelbergensis, the forgotten ancestor. Before there were Neanderthals, before there were us, There was Homo heidelbergensis, the great human progenitor lost between timelines. They appeared around 700,000 years ago, first in Africa, later spreading into Europe and Western Asia. Taller than Homo erectus, with bigger brains and more advanced tools, heidelbergensis was not just surviving, they were dominating. They hunted in organized groups, possibly using wooden spears to bring down massive game like horses, elephants, and even rhinoceroses. Sites like Schöningen, Germany, preserve wooden weapons, remarkably intact, over 300,000 years old, still sharp, still lethal. Their minds were sharper too. Their brain size reached nearly 1,200 cubic centimeters, almost equal to modern humans. Their brow ridges were heavy, their faces robust, but inside, something familiar was beginning to stir. Empathy, cooperation, foresight. They may have cared for the injured, buried their dead, returned seasonally to the same places, and some scientists believe they may have begun to shape rituals, the earliest seeds of belief, identity, or belonging. But their most important role in history wasn't in what they did. It was in what and who they became. Homo heidelbergensis likely split into multiple lines. In Europe, they evolved into the Neanderthals. In Africa, some populations may have become Homo sapiens. And perhaps in Asia, into the mysterious Denisovans. In that sense, heidelbergensis is not just a missing link. It's the fork in the road, the branching point from which three great human species emerged. But eventually, as the branches grew, the trunk withered. Homo heidelbergensis faded, not in failure, but in transformation. They weren't the end of a story. They were the turning point, the ancestor behind both the fire-lit caves of Europe and the painted rocks of Africa. And though no one remembers their language, their names, their faces, their blood runs in all who came next. Chapter 6. The Denisovans, Ghosts in Our Genes. No face, no full skeleton, not even a name carved in myth or memory. And yet, they live inside us. The Denisovans are perhaps the strangest of all ancient humans, not because of how little we know, but because of how much we're still discovering. Their existence came to light not through fossils, but through DNA. In 2010, in a Siberian cave called Denisova, scientists analyzed a single finger bone, no more than a fragment, delicate and silent. But within that fragment was a genetic code, and it didn't match Neanderthals. It didn't match modern humans. It was something else, something new, a sister species. They were soon named after the cave, Denisovans. And since then, their ghost has haunted the map of human ancestry. We found almost no bones, a few teeth, a sliver of skull. But in our DNA, they are everywhere. Up to 5% of the genetic material in some modern populations, especially among Melanesians, Aboriginal Australians, and certain Southeast Asian groups, comes from Denisovan ancestors. They bred with Homo sapiens. They bred with Neanderthals. And in at least one known case, a girl found in that very Siberian cave, they interbred with both. Her mother was Neanderthal. Her father was Denisovan, a first-generation hybrid. So who were they? Denisovans likely descended from an earlier human like Homo heidelbergensis and spread across Asia, occupying the vast steppes, forests, and high mountains of the continent. There's evidence they adapted genetically to high altitudes, like the Tibetan Plateau. Modern Sherpas and Tibetans carry a Denisovan gene that helps them survive with less oxygen, a survival gift from a species long vanished. They left tools, bracelets, and the faint suggestion of a culture. But so far, no one knows what they looked like. No face, no voice, only echoes. They are the ghosts in our genes. And perhaps that's what makes them so haunting. They remind us that some chapters of our story may never be fully known, that even in the age of science, mystery endures. And yet, their legacy continues, living silently within us, in every breath taken at altitude, in every strand of DNA that still whispers of a forgotten people who once called the cold heart of Asia home. Chapter 7. The Neanderthals. Not so different after all. For over a century, they were painted as brutes, bent, broken, grunting through the Ice Age, a dead end, a failure, a cautionary tale. But science has rewritten that story. And now, we know the truth. Neanderthals were never less than us. They were us. They emerged around 400,000 years ago, likely from Homo heidelbergensis in Europe. They spread from the forests of France to the mountains of Central Asia, enduring harsh, cold, dramatic climate shifts, and predators with nothing but tools, fire, and each other. Their bodies were built for winter, short, stocky, powerful. Their brains were as big as ours, sometimes even bigger, and inside those brains lived something unmistakably human. They hunted with strategy, ambushed massive prey, and used complex tools. They controlled fire, built shelters, sewed clothing from animal hides, and they buried their dead, sometimes with flowers, pigments, or objects. Did they mourn? Did they hope? We don't know. But they cared. Some skeletons show individuals who lived long after losing limbs or suffering severe trauma, meaning others protected and fed them. They passed down knowledge. They may have made music. A flute carved from bone was found in a cave they once occupied, and they created cave art. Handprints, symbols, red pigment splashed on stone thousands of years before Homo sapiens arrived. They even spoke, not like us, but with vocal tracts capable of language-like communication. But their most enduring connection to us isn't their tools or fire, it's inside our blood. When Homo sapiens migrated out of Africa and met the Neanderthals, they didn't always fight. They interbred. Today, if you're of non-African descent, you carry between 1% to 2% Neanderthal DNA. That DNA affects your skin, your immune system, even how you process fat or respond to certain diseases. So the Neanderthals never truly vanished. A part of them is alive in us. Their story didn't end in extinction. It was absorbed into our own. Not a failure, not a warning, but a reminder. We weren't the only humans. We weren't always alone. And in many ways, we still aren't. Chapter 8, Homo sapiens. Why only one survived? We call ourselves modern humans, Homo sapiens, the wise ones. But we weren't the first. We were just the last. By the time our species emerged in Africa around 300,000 years ago, the world was already full of humans. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, Homo erectus across the tropics, Homo floresiensis on islands, Homo heidelbergensis, perhaps still lingering in parts unknown. And yet, over the next 250,000 years, something happened. One by one, they disappeared, until only we remained. Why? What made Homo sapiens different? It wasn't size. Our brains weren't that much bigger. We weren't stronger. We weren't faster. And for most of history, we were vulnerable. But we had something else. The power of the collective mind. Around 70,000 years ago, something ignited in us. An explosion of creativity, language, imagination. We began to paint symbols. We crafted ornaments, buried our dead with ritual, told stories around firelight. We started to connect across generations, not just copying tools, but innovating, collaborating, dreaming. We built culture. We forged tribes, networks, myths. We sailed oceans before we could write. We hunted in coordinated waves. We shared food, warnings, songs. And as we moved out of Africa, wave after wave, we met the others. Neanderthals, Denisovans, perhaps even mystery species we haven't yet found. Sometimes we mated, sometimes we fought. Often, we simply outlasted. Because Homo sapiens could adapt faster, we didn't just inherit knowledge, we built on it, layer by layer, stone by stone, memory by memory. While other humans were bound to smaller groups or isolated territories, sapiens formed webs. Information flowed across clans, trade, tools, beliefs. We became a networked species, and the world bent to us. But that power came with a cost. Wherever we spread, other human species vanished. By 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals were gone. The Denisovans faded. The hobbits disappeared. The others, if they existed, left no voice. And we remained, alone, but not untouched. Their genes live within us. Their shadows walk behind us. And their stories, long buried, are finally being uncovered. Conclusion: the last human standing. We were never meant to be the only ones. We shared this planet, not with animals, but with other kinds of people. They laughed, they feared, they held their children, shaped their tools, whispered to each other beneath stars that still shine above us. We are not superior. We are simply survivors. And now, thousands of years later, we stand on bones, on buried fire pits, on carved stones and lost songs. Not at the beginning of a story, but at the end of a great convergence. We weren't the first, just the last. So when you look in the mirror, remember, your face is a mosaic. You carry echoes of those who came before, the thinkers, the wanderers, the forgotten. And their legacy isn't extinction, it's you.